So I started off calling my talk vj.js, but it's kind of migrated more towards the subtitle now. Design for hackability is what my master's thesis at Media Lab Helsinki was about. And I was thinking of ways that to make coding more accessible. And the way that I have been exploring is data flow programming in the web browser. So it's making coding more accessible for non-coders, but it also, there's value for coders as well, for encapsulating functionality and making things reusable and easy to take apart and change how they work. Mark Andreessen said a couple of years ago that software is eating the world, and I kind of see that. It hasn't taken over things like building a cabin. Like, you still need a large stump to bash the pieces together. But there probably are software elements that went into the design of those pieces. So my thesis is that if software is eating the world, then more people should be writing software, and it should be more accessible for people to try and to play with. And yes. So the concept of Metamedia is the computer is basically all past media can be represented in the computer. Text, images, video, all of these things can be represented here and delivered here, but it also can be all future media, all ways that we combine those old types of media into making new things, new tools, and new ways of communication. In the same way that the internet is the meta network, it's the network of all the other networks combined together. And I think that these two concepts are a big reason of why I'm into programming and I'm into web programming, and probably a lot of you are as well. So one software is tools for getting things done. And this is a picture of my grandpa and grandma in 1945. And she has been doing oil painting, and it was his job to make the frames. He's a carpenter, and he was making frames. But he also got into computer, and his job there was to arrange the photos of the paintings on the page so that they could be folded and made into a greeting card. And he showed me his workflow for doing that, and it was incredible. He doesn't have Photoshop or anything like that. Like, he used MS Paint and something crazy that came with a printer. And he was totally bending these tools to do what he wanted them to do, even though they're completely not designed for that. So I think it's a good example of somebody who came to computing very late in life, but figured it out and figured out the tools that he had and getting them to do what he wanted them to do. And I think that this is a big part of how he learned to use the computer, how he learned to interface with it. I don't know if this was intentional for Microsoft to include Solitaire as practice for mouse manipulation. So you have clicking, you have drag and drop, and basically like that gives you the basics of how to use the mouse, how to interact with the computer. For somebody that didn't use the computer for 75 years, and then coming to it that late, he used this to learn how to interact with the computer. But now we have touch screens, and you can interact with media just by swiping like this. So 1-year-olds can look through photos on iPad or iPhone, and they do all the time. And it's completely natural to them. So this UX design is kind of bringing people closer to the media, and also making it easier and more accessible. So with touchscreens, it's closer, and with the mouse, it's closer than with a command line interface. Like, when I started on computers I had to learn how to use DOS in order to call up Commander Keen in Duke Nukem and play the games that I wanted to play. But in code, we're still very much in this text-based world. And so I'm thinking of ways that we can apply this UX design of more direct manipulation of the logical ideas. So this is design not for hackability. The icons, iOS icons, now they're flat, but they were these kind of gemstone things that you can't, that don't really invite you to take them apart. And it's the same as smartphones. They're like, if you take them apart, then you can see the components, maybe know what they do, but you're not going to be able to do much with them after that. So I wanted to make a different metaphor for software where you take it apart, you can see the pieces and how they're communicating, and then actually do something with it. So this is the Mimo website, and we have a gallery of apps that you can start with. But how many people have done data flow programming in some context? Like, can I see like vv, anybody, Quartz Composer, Pure Data, Max, LabVIEW, anybody? Yeah. Okay, nice. So the basic concept is you have, at least here you have this library of components, and you drag them out here, and then to connect them, you pull a wire from here. So you go from the output to the input, and then when you send signals, they travel along these wires. And basically, under the hood, all of these modules are classes, and all the wires represent event listeners. So the outputs make events, and the event listeners send that data to the inputs of the other modules. So that's kind of this is the representation of what I want to, where I want to take apps. Like I want to have this interface that when you open it up, you can see the boxes inside and how they're connected, how they're communicating. So this was a animation that I made with my baby when she was a couple months old, and I noticed that when I left the room, she would be in a different position when I came back, and she moved really slowly. But so I made a stop motion application or a time lapse application here, so I can show how easy that would be. So I have a camera module and an animation module, and I'll use a countdown. And there are different ways of doing this. Allow camera. So this is the get user meter camera, and I'll just leave the duration at 3 seconds. And so every three seconds, then the countdown will tell the camera to send an image, and then I'll attach that to the animation, which is just a collection of those images. And once I have a few, then it'll start to make an animation. So I was playing with stop motion first, but then when I had that question, like, what is she doing when I'm out of the room? I was able to just add another module, and then like see this time-lapse view of her. This was my introduction to media creation, digital media creation. And if anybody recognizes that, it's a Connectix QuickCam. It plugged into the printer port and the whatever that is for power from the keyboard, and it was really kind of kludgy to put all these pieces together. Like I wanted to make animations of Legos and Play-Doh, and I figured it out, but I had to use a lot of different tools in the same way that my grandpa did, like tools that weren't designed for stop motion, but putting them together and figuring them out. So they could be that. So my hope is that if somebody's looking for stop motion or for whatever problem they're trying to solve, if they can find this kind of system and see an app that somebody's already made to solve the problem, if it doesn't quite solve it, then they can open it up and change how it works. So I want to design to give everybody that. I've been doing demos. I saw a talk from a designer that does really cool generative stuff using processing, making SVGs, but he showed his process for extracting a color palette from an image, which is nice. You can use that to make generative stuff. So the image in the background here was generated from the colors in this image. And his process involved going into Photoshop and exporting to GIF and reducing the colors, and then somehow getting that colors out of there. So as he was explaining this process, I was thinking, well, I could just put this into one module, and then anytime that I wanted to do that, I could do that in the same kind of flow and get however many colors I want from the image. I made this eyeball at Art Hack Day in Stockholm, and it took more time to blow up the balloon than to make the visualization, to wire together the visualization. That's not actually true. But I started Art Hack Day. If you've never done it, I highly recommend it. It's a great way to work on something intensely for 3 days and then show it in a gallery with a bunch of other crazy stuff. But the first couple of days I was working on some eye tracking glasses, and I did my first 3D printing and put together electronics, and I was trying to get it to work and then just realized that it wasn't going to work. So I had one day to put this together, and I found the balloon and wired together the animation. And I don't think, like, obviously there's a lot of work that I went into making all those components, but then actually putting them together took very little time compared to what it would take if I was starting with text, an empty text editor. And I want to start to wrap up with this quote from Howard Rheingold. It's important that we realize today that those skills of tomorrow will have little to do with how we operate computers and a great deal to do with how to use augmented intellects, enhanced communications, and amplified imaginations. And I would add, not just operate computers, but also program computers. Like, it doesn't matter so much how we're programming these things, but if we can make it easier and to take things apart, see how they work, and put them back together, I think that will help with the amplified imaginations part of this. I think that quote is from '94, and I think that we're far enough into the age of Google and Facebook to have some idea of augmented intellects and enhanced communications, like what those actually mean in progress. And yeah, so I want to see how that's going to work for amplified imaginations as well, and seeing more people programming. So where to go from here? I have a lot of ideas from working with visual programming for a while. I've been imagining what it could be if we could actually arrange these modules in space and do some kind of spatial programming. So I think, like, creating design mock-ups and playing with those possibilities is going to be a lot of fun. But obviously for now, I hope that more people start using this and start making reusable components. I think custom elements is a great way to do this, and I want to build that into this system where any custom component, you can put it in and it'll automatically, you can wire stuff up to its list, to its event, to its messages, and I've joined up with a team to make this into a company. We have a Kickstarter. It's actually closing in about 10 hours now. And so we've passed our goal, which is great. So I'm not hitting you up for money, but I'm hitting you up for brains. And I'm really interested to work with the JavaScript community and see where we can take this idea. And that's about it.
All right, well, we'll do questions since it's the last session.
So that was really neat. I didn't know that was like data flow programming was what you called that. So is Alice a data flow programming thing? Like the Alice IDE?
I haven't used it.
Oh, okay. It's like a thing that they use to teach kids programming. It's pretty cool. Like also like the Lego robots, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I've used Scratch, and Scratch is a different kind of visual programming.
Yeah.
You snap together bits, and Scratch is actually closer to the code than this kind of stuff, because each little block is like a line of code, basically, and it's just an easier way to connect you don't have to worry about syntax. You don't have to worry about a semicolon when you snap all those things together. But this kind is different. So you could have that kind of visual programming inside one of the components, or something like that, or the other way around. But
okay. Can I do one more? Yeah. So when you say like creating components, like so those ones that you showed, do those already exist in like I checked out the Noflow JavaScript thing. Like when you say people should create more, like that would be cool for people to create more components, like what do you mean by that? And like, do you think see more like artists using this, kind of like how people use open frameworks, or who do you want to reach?
That's where I came at it from my thesis side. And my thesis is at Meemoo.org. So there you can see all the components that I have for Mimo. And Noflow is actually, it's kind of a fork. I have another version, but Noflow, Noflow started with Node.js, and that's why it's called Noflow. And it's lower level programming. So I kind of came at it from the user interface of putting these things together, and also like the things that I wanted to play with images and stuff. And Noflow has come from lower level, closer to JavaScript, and more Node.js kind of things. So Henry, who started the Noflow project, rewrote Jekyll in Noflow, so you can use that. You can use Jekyll in your Node.js apps without using Ruby, which is pretty great. And the graph for Jekyll is a lot easier to understand than 16,000 lines of Ruby code.
Can you show an implementation of a component?
Yes. So all of them in the interface have this cog icon that should link directly to the source. So the API I came up with is relatively simple. So all these input mat, input fill, these are things that happen when you get data from somewhere else. So for example, when you input the fill on the circle, then you get a color, and then you set this context fill style to that color. So that's the basic interface of what you do when you get data. To define the inputs and outputs, I have this this kind of thing. So this one has a bunch of inputs, but basically the inputs can have a type, and yeah, the outputs as well, and that helps in the interface. When you start to drag let's see, where can I get a color? So here you have a HSLA color generation. When you start to drag from there, you see up here it'll highlight the ones that make sense to connect to. So that's all that types do in Meemoo, is kind of give you some indication in the UI where that data is going to make sense. So when you connect that, then you get the color. Then there are some UI elements like sliders, and most of the UI stuff is normalized from 1 to 0, or I tried to do that as much as possible, so that when you move those sliders, then the data flows through and you get your color. And I'm going to be doing some VJing tonight. That's the VJ part is going to be at 8:30 in the party here, so 8:30 to 10 maybe. So feel free to come up and talk with me. I might be up here, but you can come up and I can show you what's going on. And yeah.
Over here.
Yep.
Yeah. So this looks really cool. So one thing I always think with stuff like this is one of the problems with these kind of components is that with software, we're always using APIs which are actually very brittle, right? And so components, you can only use components that were explicitly written for this system. And you know, everyone has their own system and a different way of having modules. So I'm wondering, have you at all looked into ways that we can actually kind of make looser coupled interfaces between software components and possibly make it easier to incorporate components that weren't actually designed for a particular system, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, like with components, it's like, you know, if you don't know the right name, the right function to call or whatever, you can't actually connect two things together, right? And I wonder if we could make things more like the physical world in some way, in that two things don't have to be designed together to be able to work together.
Yeah, I think Mozilla Polymer project and Mozilla's Xtags and Google's Polymer project they're both exploring these HTML custom elements. And I think that's going to be a really good thing for this. Like all of these could be custom elements. And then if you didn't want to use this interface, you could just make vSlider tag, circle tag, and then you get the canvas out of that or whatever. So I hope that that's going to help with that problem. But yeah, in making these components, I've used a lot of different libraries and kind of wrapped them in my own thing that normalizes the inputs and the outputs. And if there's some kind of standard for that, like that custom elements could tell you or tell the page like what are their inputs and what are their outputs, I think that would be cool.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
So I once upon a time worked on a really large LabVIEW project, which is pretty similar to this, although I didn't know that it had a name. And a problem that I ran into was it was very difficult for me to like grok what anything was doing at any time. Sometimes there would be like cool animations that would show me timers going off and that sort of thing. But to understand like if there was a bug or anything like that, I would have to click on a component and then like click for 5 minutes, like drilling down into components to figure out what was happening. And I found that was an instance where the visual metaphor impeded my progress as opposed to a text version where I could have just like grepped for a thing. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Is there an equivalent to like grepping for a thing in this, or like is there an equivalent of like a stack trace that I could look at so I can debug faster?
Well, so this is more of the toy implementation, and then with Noflow, we're hoping to expand it to more serious programming, and we're thinking of a lot of ways to make it work like that, but I don't know exactly how it's going to end up. But it's going to be a process of us making it and using it and figuring things out. Like one thing that I thought would be nice in a running graph is like to click on any wire and then see the data going through that wire, kind of, instead of going back to the code and making a debugger call or putting in a breakpoint or something, just clicking on a wire and seeing what's going through there. But yeah, obviously when you start to get components inside of components, then like digging through those and figuring out where things are changing, like it's going to be some kind of design that's going to we're going to have to figure it out as we go.
Are we done? Oh, no, we're not. We do have time for one more.
I wanted to say thank you because I work with kids and I teach them how to code, and I'm definitely going to use this. It's awesome. And I wanted to ask you, how do you embed remixing into the design of your tool? Like, can people fork other people's projects, or do you have a library or a package where you can get certain collections of combinations? And if you thought about somehow integrating Markdown as well, and yeah. Thanks.
So if you have a graph that you like and you want to save it, you can save it to gist with that button, and then you get a link to it immediately. So I don't have anything that's collecting all these, but I'm kind of watching online to see what people are making, and some interesting things are happening in Tumblr now with it. So that's one thing. Like sharing your stuff is really easy. And if you make a graph that you like and you share it, and then somebody else opens it and saves it, you can load them as a subgraph. So this was a graph that I made earlier, and I just loaded it as a subgraph. I don't have any inputs and outputs defined in this one, but yeah, that's the idea, that you can take somebody else's graph and put it into yours and define some outputs there. Yeah, and so I have some resources on the website, and hopefully we'll continue to add them. But this is the main page for ideas. I have this activity for making a physical kind of 3D animation thing. So you have the basic instructions are here, and I added some illustrations, and then I embedded the app itself here, so you could read this and then like use the app on the same page there. So this is just an iframe, but I think that there will be, or I'm hoping to make more like better ways of kind of packaging these things and sharing them.
Cool. Thank you very much. That was amazing.
Thanks.